So when you look at the title of this thing, for one thing, it looks like there are a lot of different disciplines probably involved in there. There's maybe some engineering, machine learning, medicine, maybe music, maybe psychoacoustics. So it's an interdisciplinary sort of thing, but it also may, when you see, oh, sound for making people feel better, sounds a bit new age and woo-woo, right? I'm gonna, and many things out there nowadays are like that, but there are many that aren't. There's science backed up that shows that sound really can reduce anxiety, but it's particular types of sounds. If you hear an elephant trumpeting, that's probably not one of the sounds that's going to reduce your anxiety, but maybe a quiet rain will, okay. The project was funded by the New Frontiers in Research Fund. I don't know if you guys have ever received any money from him. They often fund interdisciplinary research that's quote unquote high risk, high reward. Whether this was either of those, I don't know. But anyway, that's the source of funding. And because of the interdisciplinary nature of the topic, the team that was nominally working on this project covered a lot of different disciplines too. There's arts, there's science, there's medicine, there's nursing, there's computer science, and computer engineering as well. And then other people that aren't the PIs on this project covered even a wider range of discipline. We have music composers, we have music therapists, there's all sorts of different things. The sound we're using here, actually most of it is in music, but there are people from these disciplines who are associated with this project. Critical care nurses, wide variety. Okay. So that's sort of the background on the project. I want to say a little bit more about Michael, who is the principal investigator. And he has had an interest in sound for wellness for quite a while. It is wide-ranging from producing music songs and videos to promote public health announcements, maybe in places that don't have a big public health infrastructure, where you have local guys who are composing the music and performing it, so it gets people to pay attention more. If you have a local artist doing it, then maybe some boring medical something or other. And he's also more recently been interested in student wellness, so sound for helping students concentrate better on their work, get better sleep, relax after the pressures of their academic life, those sorts of things. So he's had an interest like that, and that's how these guys, Elizabeth and Jim, from nursing and medicine here at the U of A, came to us with a problem of ICU. There's a lot of anxiety in patients in the ICU, and I'll show you in just a minute why that's the case. And they said, look, you know, normally how we deal with this is giving anti-anxiety drugs. There are problems with that. I'll get into that in a minute. Maybe there are other ways. We know your expertise in sound for wellness. Let's go, and the rest is sort of history with this. So here comes the graphic part. Okay, be prepared. Be prepared. Really? Are you serious? Well, how do I advance this if it's not going to do it that way? Well, let's just poke at it then. Okay, that way. It's going to be very interesting what happens when you plug into things. Okay, so this poor guy, he is in a critical care facility. Normally when you're in there, you're not in there because you have, you know, an ingrown toenail. You're in there because you have a health crisis going on, maybe something having to do with an injury or an illness or those sorts of things. Maybe it's a surgery also. There are surgical intensive care units. And you're going to be intensively monitored and intensively treated. Okay, that means 24 hours a day. There's a lot of monitoring that goes on. For example, you may have blood pressure, you might have electrocardiogram, you know, electrical leads on you to get electrocardiogram, blood, pulse oximeters, one is the word, to look at blood oxygenation. You may have frequent blood draws or other bodily fluids to see what's going on. So there are lots of things about that you're constantly being monitored. Some of those are more comfortable than others. And then there's also a lot of these monitors have auditory beeps and lights and things to get people's attention, medical professionals, so that they can attend to you. Then on the other hand, the treatment may have IV inserted for medicine, fluids and nutrients. You may have simple thing like a nasal cannula to give you more oxygen. That's a simple one. In this poor guy's case, you can't really tell. He's on a ventilator. That means you're intubated and something breathes for you. This is probably one of the worst experiences guys have in the ICU. I mean, they're trying to keep you alive. So in some sense, it's sort of ironic that the places that are trying the best to keep you healthy also cause you to have a lot of distress and discomfort at the same time. So in order to do that, they often give you parallelize you so that they can intubate you, and maybe also you may be paralyzed, not paralyzed, that too, but that's independent. While you're here, so you don't hurt yourself on the ventilator. So you see curare here. This is some French place or Quebec. I have no idea where it's happened, but that's curare is a substance, a plant alkaloid that works on the motor neurons, and it does paralyze you. So nowadays they use other things besides that, but that's what's happening to this poor guy. So he's sort of maybe a more extreme case than you would see in an ICU, but that's the situation. So what happens? You're tethered to all of this equipment. There's monitoring equipment. There's the treatment stuff. Add to that the fact that you feel crappy. You may have pain, you may have nausea, you may have all sorts of discomfort, right? And there may be bright lights over you. You may have no idea of time of day. There are no windows in the room. You don't even know that. So you lose track of what's going on. You feel as though you don't have control over your life. So anxiety is a common thing. Delirium is a common thing. You may also be sleep deprived because of all of this interruptions to monitor you and help you day, night, doesn't matter. So it's a tough situation. Now, normally what they do is they give people anti-anxiety drugs. And there are pluses and minuses of those. For those who they work for, it helps. They become less anxious. Sometimes they're contraindicated because of other medications you may be taking or even other health issues you may have. So not everybody can take everything. And they also make you often very drowsy, dizzy, kind of lethargic. Maybe that's a good thing when you're feeling bad and you're in this situation, but also there have been studies where people have looked at the amount of time that you spend in the ICU. And actually, often anxiety medications can prolong your stay in the ICU. And that's partly because you are out of it. So movement gets more oxygen into your body, right? That's something that's good. If you've had surgery, you often have to jump up afterwards, even though you may not feel like it, to move around. They don't want blood clots. But you are healthier if you are moving. And if you are sedated like this, it's a long time in there, so it's not good for the patients, it's not good for the family, it's not good for the pocketbook either, longer stays in the hospital, right? Okay, so are there alternatives that might work for anxiety for these poor guys? Okay, we're done with the gross part. Now we can continue with the rest of it. All right. So these are my desiderata for these types of this type of the systems. First of all, it should be effective for everybody. So what's sort of hidden underneath there is that maybe this system adapts to each patient, right? Because maybe one thing is not good for everybody. Just one drug isn't, but if you have something that's adaptive, so it's hidden underneath. You don't want it to cause any harm, any harmful side effects or any other sorts of things. You don't want to be poking somebody with something in order to have it work. So, I prefer no drugs. I don't want it to interfere with any other treatment that the patient may be receiving. And you want it to be easy to set up and also take away from the patient. If an emergency comes up and you need to do it, you don't want to have some complicated piece of equipment that you have to undo in order to get access to the patient to treatment on. Other things are, it's always available. Often anxiety for these patients, I think generally patients in hospitals, but in ICUs especially, is things like that happen at night. And so staffing is usually a little bit less at night, especially for people who may be able to come in and help you. So you want that to be there. You want this to be an autonomous type of a system. So interaction, the patient should not have to actively do anything for this. Yeah, there's things you're going to measure about him, but he doesn't have to press buttons or say things or blah, 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 blah. None of that, right? Should be robust. It's not going to break the minute you bump it on something, right? And it should be inexpensive. So can you do all of this? I think you can. What I'm going to show you doesn't exactly do that, but I think if someone who was a real engineer were doing it, it probably would be the case. So this is what you would like the system to do. So when the critical care guys came they came to Michael because of his expertise in sound and wellness. And I said, look, can we use sound instead of drugs to help these guys in the ICU reduce the incidence and severity of their anxiety? And he invited me to this meeting. Not sure why, but I went and it was actually really cool. So when I was there, I sort of thought, well, if I were, this is kind of came out of my head after this meeting. If I were making a system at the high level, this is what it would look like. Okay, so you guys, in here you always see the agent in the environment and blah, 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 blah. It's like that, but I've added a few more things on here, okay? So here's the environment. He's the patient, and he's a complicated thing. We're amazing biological systems, and we don't just behave like a game or a simple little grid world or something. We're not like that at all. We change over time in ways that even we don't know how this is. So this is a complicated system, but yet you're trying to control this in a way, and the control you'd like to do is reduce anxiety. So there are going to be sensors associated with this. I haven't said anything about what those are. And they're anxiety indicators. What those are, that actually was a big deal for us to figure out what that is. There may be filters that you do after you do this measurement that you get in. And for me, this is going to be a learning system. Simple one, but a learning system. So you're going to have a reward coming in, and you have a controller that decides what sort of sounds are going to be generated and played for the patient. So if we say, okay, that's the high level picture. Now, how do we burrow down inside of that? I'm really glad there's a clock in here because I know I have way too much to say. There is one, now I did say that I don't want the patient to actively do anything. But if they are able to communicate to somebody else, there may be something that you're listening to that is really bothering you. And there's the capability, you should have the capability to change the sound, if that's the case. And also turn it off, if that's a change as well. Okay, so this one is kind of I spent a lot of time reading about this stuff to figure out what I would put here. Because when you have, when something that you need to attend to, and is probably something worrisome, your autonomic nervous system kicks in, and it's the sympathetic aspect of it that does. So have a part of your brain called the amygdala, and that gets in a lot of sensory data, and it goes, okay, something bad is about to happen here. I better do something. I'm going to tell the hypothalamus, because he's the orchestrator of all these other things that go on in my body, what is going to happen next. And that guy, hypothalamus, he says, well, okay, I need to send out particular hormones that are going to make me ready to deal with a situation. I either have to, it's fight or flight. You've heard this expression before, right? So either run away or you're going to confront whatever is there. And that means your heart goes faster, blood pressure goes up, your airways dilate so you get more oxygen in. Your pupils dilate to let more light in so you can see better. So all your senses, everything's going, you're ready to go, right? You also have cortisol, which is a hormone, and that thing causes you to have more glucose available. So that's not only glucose for your things like muscles, but it's also for your brain. You've got to think, if you're going to do fight or flight, you can't be going, duh. No, that's not going to work. Everything has to be firing on all cylinders if you're going to be successful with this. So, of these many things you can measure, for example, there's heart rate, there's blood pressure, there's also this, what they used to call galvanic skin response, and I forget what it's now called nowadays, but you get sweaty too when you're nervous. So there are ways of measuring that. Heart rate variability, what does that mean? That doesn't mean how your heart rate varies over the day, but it's actually looking at the distance peak to peak between successive pulses and basically looking at the variance or standard deviation of that. So when we're breathing normally, there's a lot of variability. When you breathe in, your heart rate goes up. When you breathe out, it goes down. And that's just a natural thing with our bodies. If you're stressed, your heart rate variability tends to get lower. Mostly how heart rate variability has been used in the medical setting is for longer term assessment. So if people are having a sort of chronic stress issues, they do longer term measurements of heart rate variability, and they say, well, okay, this guy is doing better, his variability is going up, but oh no, he's not, so whatever therapies we're applying, this is not working for him. As a short term measure, not so much. I mean, if you take it to the absurd and you just look between two peaks, you're not going to see any variability at all. So people using the short-term measurements, exactly how that's going to be useful is a little bit up in the air right now. So for us, we wanted to I wanted to do something that I could use as a short-term measurement. And I ended up settling on heart rate. There's a few other reasons to prefer heart rate over heart rate variability. I read a paper in Nature, one of the subjournals, I forget which one, that looked at comparison of heart rate and heart rate variability among two cohorts of people. One was a set of guys who had good stress coping mechanisms, and the other was a guy that didn't. And the guys that weren't necessarily stressed all the time, but if presented with a stressor, in this case it was preparing a speech, public speech to be recorded on the computer. Okay, we all know how that goes, right? That they found two things. Both groups, heart rate went up and heart rate variability went down. But in both groups, the heart rate went up about the same amount. But heart rate variability didn't change so much for the guys who had the good coping mechanisms. So, you say, if I were to look at him and see, is he stressed? If I looked at his heart rate variability and this guy was good at coping, maybe I wouldn't be able to tell. The other thing is you think of ICU patients, and they may be stressed all the time, so their heart rate variability is pretty low. Is it going to get lower when things get even worse for them? Yeah, maybe, maybe not. So I settled on heart rate. It's easy to measure. We have a lot of devices to do it, and yeah. So this whole loop now, I mean, when you're trying to reduce anxiety, you have to figure out when you're going to be able to detect that reduction. Talking to the medical guys on this project, like Elizabeth and Jim, they said probably for a full response to 30 minutes. But they said usually within 5 minutes, you're going to be able to detect whether something's going to be working. And moreover, some of these anxiety responses can be learned. I don't mean like, you learn how to ski or something like that, but it's almost like a classical conditioning thing. So that I didn't apply in here. But this thing here is a 5-minute loop, okay? And the thing that I measure is looking at heart rate during the, I don't have it there. I see it on my screen, but I don't see it here. Excuse me. The final minute, I measure it once every minute just because I wanted to see how things evolved over time. But it's only the last 5-minute sample that I use. And to measure heart rate, it's real easy. You guys, how many of you guys have Fitbits or Apple Watches or things like that? You wear those rings? Yeah, everybody's got those things. So this photoplethysmography is a really kind of interesting technique. It's just using light. In our case, we use a reflective kind. We ended up using something that goes on the wrist. But that guy, light goes in, and some gets reflected back out, but it's absorbed by various things in there. But one of them is when there's more blood in your veins and more hemoglobin, whether it's oxygenated or not. There's different characteristics of the light that's absorbed or whatever, but you can detect pulse this way. There's a lot of signal processing. Reading about this, it's amazing how much signal processing goes into this to get this information out. But it's really easy because all you need is an LED and a photo detector to figure out what's going on. All you need, yeah, and all of the signal processing underneath. But it can be done inexpensively. Now, there are some problems with this technology, and there's a lot of research. If you're interested in this area, there's a lot of open questions. One is that ambient light can be a problem. So if your detector has, like, even if we end up with wrist ones, but if the fit isn't that good, ambient light can cause a problem. The other thing is the amount of melanin in your skin. So more melanin that absorbs, and it's a little bit harder to do. If you move, there are issues. So not only does that maybe move the sensor and detector, unfortunately, so the light, there's that aspect of it. But when you move, you gush things, right? Your muscles compress things. So the amount of blood that's in a place that you have changes in where your little capillaries and bigger arteries and things like that are. So that can change this. And also there can be electronic noise in your devices. So there are a lot of things that kind of make this more difficult. But still, it's a useful technology. And actually, the device that we ended up using seems very accurate when compared with medical grade devices. So that was good. We also asked our subjects not to conduct, symphonies or something, or play tennis or something during it. So there isn't a lot of movement, but this is a direction that this went. So what happens with?
Can I just ask?
Oh yeah, please.
What's their main way of taking their heart rate in the hospital?
Oh, okay, there's a bunch of different ways. Probably the most accurate is electrocardiogram. But the blood pressure cuffs, we know that often has that as a capability there. And your pulse oximeters can detect it there. But I think if they really want to look at The nurses can also take your pulse. They sit there for 30 seconds and they take your pulse. So there's many ways
But
of
the
doing it.
meter you see in the movies is the pulse oximeter usually, or that's the,
Oh, that could be anything. That could be any, yeah, it depends on the device.
the
There's
CGM.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
One more there.
Oh, sorry. Phew.
These patients are all wired up. Why don't you just, isn't everything being measured already?
Everything is being measured, but oy, 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 oy. We haven't gotten to the devices yet, but I'll step in with that right now. So I think that most of the medical community, if there's doctors in here, don't kill me, is not used to having control systems that don't involve people in the loop other than the patient. So a lot of these things, yeah, they have all this data, but it's a person that's going to interpret it. Or either that or it's long-term data that you run through some statistical package and figure out, no. So something that's just a control loop in there. So yeah, you have these fancy devices that you can do things with, but often getting stuff out in real time is a problem. And it's also a problem even on your Apple thingies, because people don't want to release that. Somebody could do their own fitness programs. Why should I even bother to do the software and everything else? No, we're going to send it to this device, but we're not actually going to give you raw data. So we ran into real problems with that. In fact, it took forever. Some of the things that allow you to do some of the sampling, there was a great application on the iPhone where you could get raw data out, look at the wave shapes and everything else, but you had to hold your finger over the phone camera. Okay, that's fine if you're doing a little sample. If you're going on and on and on, that's not going to work. And let alone ICU, I mean, just for healthy volunteers. So that was a great thing. They're little hobbyist toys. Those are great. They often allow you to, again, do a lot of the signal processing yourself, but they're often fragile. So you loan those out to guys to work with. See, we had a problem because COVID sort of hit a little bit after the project started. So things that we actually thought we might do more in a laboratory setting, we couldn't. Have to send people home with something. So it has to be something easy and not, breakable. That's the issue. So we ran into a real problem. I'll tell you how we solved that, but it was not trivial. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're measuring only kind of the heart rate.
Yeah.
So, like, is there any way to make sure that's not caused by any other medical issues?
No, there is, well.
Using other information would be more, like, informative in terms of telling the anxiety?
I think heart rate is actually a really good one, but you're right that there can be medications that you take that can be influencing heart rate. So those things, the guys in a hospital would know that sort of information if somebody is taking it. And this may not be a one-size-fits-all thing, but for most people, heart rate is a great thing for anxiety. Yeah, you want the measurements to be accurate. If they're off, it's not helpful. And maybe integrating other pieces of information in the future would be great. I'm just trying to get something up and running. So simple. Can we understand it? Does it work? Blah, blah, blah. That's where this went. But yes, you're totally right. Okay. All right. So I made up a definition. You hear the word therapeutic. Okay. It usually means it works for somebody in the medical sense. But I said that a sound, if you play it during an interval, it's therapeutic if two things happen. Either your pulse is below, say, a medically set threshold during that, by the end of that period, or your pulse has come down over that period. And our period, as we said, our control loop was 5 minutes, so we should be able to detect these things. What is this threshold? If you're in a hospital, probably a doctor would say, I would like to keep the patient's heart rate at or below this number. And he may use a whole bunch of information that he has or she has about that in order to set it. For the case of the system that I set up, you have a resting heart rate that you take when you're kind of relaxed. And then you add a delta on top of that. It's positive delta, because there may be variability, and as I found from the measurements we got from guys, healthy volunteers, can be quite a bit of variability. Some people have very little change in their resting heart rate when they're relaxed and sitting down, and other guys, it's all over the place. And I don't know what's causing it, but it doesn't seem like all of a sudden something horrible happened. It's just that there's quite a bit of variation in it normally.
Is this delta, is that like standard deviation? Person, or is that
yeah, but it's so almost like it's person dependent. So actually setting this thing, I didn't set it properly for the experiments. I have to be frank about that.
deviation?
Yeah. And I set it, actually in my experiments, I set it to 5. I thought that was enough. For many people, that is enough, not for everyone. So what this threshold is, this and reward depend quite a bit on it, but how you would set this is medically something to be determined. And unfortunately, all of the testing got compressed on this project because we had delay after delay after delay for many reasons. So something that should have happened, 4 years ago when the thing started, happened in the last, 6 months, 5 months, 4 months, something like that. So unfortunately, a lot of unknowns. I had to compress fancier testing in with something that I wish I'd been able to do sooner. So what does the reward look like? Again, simple, simple, simple. If you're at or below the threshold, it's 0. Otherwise, if you're above the threshold, it's the difference between the threshold. That's the same threshold as the other one, and the pulse. And when the pulse is greater than the threshold. And if you click one of these buttons and say, this sound is driving me crazy, it's giving me anxiety, then you set a very large penalty. I think it was minus 30 or something like that in what I did. So that's how the reward sets. It's very simple. Originally I had something, it was doing derivatives of, how fast is it descending? And actually that all gets captured in the simple things. So I go for simplicity. I don't go for complication, and that is how that's set. So how do I update the value of a sound? Okay, it's a simple recency weighted updating as we always do. So I won't go into that, but that's exactly how it's done. Okay.
You use the word sounds, it's a constant tone as opposed to like a melody or something.
No, okay, well, what do I mean by sound? It could be anything. The ones that I chose, which I will talk about, and maybe I'll talk about that now a little bit. This is a little out of order. The sounds that I settled on were primarily sounds that were natural. By what do I mean by that? I don't mean a fart or something like this. I mean, sounds like soft rain or wind through, say, conifers, but light wind, not tornado force, or the sound of water flowing, but again, not waves crashing, but those sort of things. So there's a noise component to that. There's not a lot of attack. You know what I mean by attack, where all of a sudden the power is there right away, right? So those are gradual, and they're not particularly loud. Now, these things, people have done research, and quite a bit recently, I'm guessing within the past 5 or 10 years, of using these on healthy volunteers and measuring exactly things like heart rate and blood pressure and those sort of things. And it doesn't really matter who you are or where you grew up or what your shoe size is, any of those things. Natural sounds seem to reduce people's heart rate and blood pressure. Those are the main things that they've measured. And it's kind of interesting that this works. These papers, I don't remember seeing so much about the why, which is always something that I'm interested in. But I have a feeling it partly has to do with our millions of years of evolution. So at night, if we hear a twig cracking or something, we're going to pay attention, right? That's not, but if there's something that's sort of soft, we say it's safe, okay, no predators, nothing's going to happen here. I can relax. And those sorts of things, there's no growling, there's no loud something that causes us to focus our attention on something. So I think that's in large part why that works. And it doesn't seem to, as I say, matter where you grew up or anything else, these seem to generally work, which is interesting because it isn't, I mean, it may sound that way, but there's science to back it up. People have done studies. Again, the why of these, a little bit unclear to me, and maybe also the guys that found the effects as well.
How big of a repertoire of sounds do your agents get?
Tiny. And I sort of screwed up on that too, because I think I chose my sounds too well. This is really out of order. So when you see these on these slides, of things I flipped it. I had 10 in my case, just 10.
Their action then will play a 5-minute sound.
Yes, it will. Yes, it will. Yeah.
Sorry to.
No, this is good. It's one of these where you want to say 15 things at the same time, but you figure out what you're going to do. Okay, so what do the actions look like? I have 2 different policies. One is a normal epsilon greedy policy, okay? And then I have if it's not broken, don't fix it policy, right? So supposing you were going to go in for some major surgery, but you knew ahead of time that you were going to go in, so maybe you would like to run this system on yourself and find out what sounds work best for you to reduce anxiety. You may well do something like epsilon greedy, where you're going to search the space for a certain amount of time, but you don't want epsilon to be like really huge, because if you're bouncing all over the place like this, that may, with sounds, that may irritate you enough that you're not getting such a good, may cause a bit of anxiety in that case. So there was a balance there. And then when you are in the ICU, this would be the policy that's there. Not broken, don't fix it means that at the beginning, if you had learned values of sounds, you would choose the maximum value at the beginning, right? But then over time, if that sound was working for you, was it therapeutic? Was it below the threshold, or did your pulse go down over that interval? You just stick with it, right? And otherwise, if it wasn't working for you, or there was that button press that somebody did for you, really wasn't working, you look at the remaining sounds and you take the maximum value one over all of those, okay? So that, you are looking like, I don't know what.
I don't get it. You keep saying you, I don't know if you is the patient or you is the machine that's choosing the sounds. And these two policies, I don't get it.
This policy happens when you're trying, if you have the luxury of testing out this system before you actually need to use it, epsilon greedy. So you search more of the space in that policy.
The patient is actually using the second one?
In the ICU, yes. So the patient can use both. If he's planned a surgery, this one happens at the beginning, right? You do that beforehand. You're at home, you're running this thing, you run that at home. When you go into the ICU, this is what's run for you.
But the patient could be unconscious, they don't actually.
They don't, and this is set up for you. Whoever sets up the piece of equipment would tell you which place you're in.
And
Right.
The
Yeah.
machine follows the not broken, don't fix it.
Yeah, and the machine also follows that, but you're in a different mode when you're operating the machine. You have two different modes. Sorry about that, I was not clear. Thank you for this, but I wish you'd asked your question instead of wrinkle your eyebrows. So, okay, so there's that. We have this. Yeah. All right, so let me go on. So I talked a little bit about this already. And all of the sounds are high noise component, the very slow attack, and you have a low amplitude. The loudness is low. And I have both sampled sounds from natural and, yes, what's from the back of the room?
We do have one question online.
Yes.
It says, if the patient insists on changing the sound, is it removed from the set?
No, it's given a high penalty. In our case, it's -30, I think. I have to look in the software, but yeah, they get a high penalty. So it doesn't mean you don't revisit, because just because it was bothering you right now, maybe a week from now, you may say, okay, it's not. So one of the things I was worrying about here is how much habituation do you have to these sounds? Things that worked for you for a while, do you get bored, do you get habituated, maybe it's not working, right? And in those cases, I actually found with at least one of my participants who said, oh, I like this, but it's going on and on and on with the same thing, because she was in this therapeutic, with this not broken, don't fix it mode, and she physically pressed the button for that sound, even though it was working for her. So that will push bias you away from that sound for a while, but then later on you may revisit it. So it's not removed from the set ever, because you're not something that you're always the same way. We don't want to go in that direction. Yeah.
Were you able to test find results for conscious as well as unconscious?
Nobody's unconscious because everybody was healthy. I mean, some of them fell asleep, but yeah, that's about as unconscious as they were. Yeah.
So if the patient presses the button saying they don't like this, do they have to wait the whole 5-minute interval?
No, they don't. It happens immediately. Yeah, if they don't like it, you're on to another one. Okay. So what does this thing look like really? Okay, this is the patient over here. That's his brain talking to his heart. Yeah, okay. And down here, for the sensors, we used devices by a company here in Edmonton called HealthGauge, because I talked to it when I was having trouble finding a device that we could actually work with. I talked to a friend of mine about this, and he pointed me to these guys. That's Patrick Bolarski, probably most of you guys know him. So they make actually this is made in China, and I don't know if they're still using this device or it's something new. But anyway, we got this a while ago. It's called the Phoenix Watch, and it measures a bunch of things, but one of them is heart rate through photoplethysmography. And they also have applications here. So this guy talks Bluetooth. The sensor talks that to the excuse me, to the application here, and then it sends the data there. This guy, unfortunately, couldn't talk directly to there. That would have been nicer, but it didn't happen. And in order to do hands-off operation on these devices, we could only get 15-second samples of heart rate. We couldn't go longer. In order to do longer, you can do it on those, but you have to touch. We don't want anybody to have to touch. So we're stuck with the 15 seconds, which is okay, but I wish it were more. Then this has to get to here. Well, that's a problem in itself, and it took a year to resolve that, which it shouldn't have, but it did. It's done over 802.11 Wi-Fi to talk to the, this is where the controller sits. And though I've drawn a Macintosh here, this thing works. The HealthGauge software for getting this heart rate here works on Android and iOS. And the controller software works on Mac and Windows. So it's, basically everybody can use it. Windows was a pain. I won't go into it, but it was a pain, okay? We've talked a lot about these things here. If you remember nothing else from this talk, look at My Noise. It's a wonderful set of sounds on the network. The guy's a brilliant sound engineer. He's from Belgium. And he has a whole bunch of recordings of his own. He has recordings from other people now. It's really high fidelity stuff. And he has this really nice way of taking the sounds and putting them together so you don't detect any periodicity. So he doesn't have an infinite recording, obviously, but the way he's put these things together, it's amazing. A lot of times you can find little samples of sounds on the internet, these little things, and how do you loop them without getting this periodic thing, which is not something that's going to cause a relaxation thing.
You said it's like 10 different things. Everything is going to be a sequence of sounds.
Everything is a blend. So for example, this is what we have. One of them is white noise. That's synthetically generated. Another one is a recording from a national park in Poland, which predominantly stream sounds, a bit of birds. Another one's Tierra del Fuego. Or wind sounds, I guess the Tierra del Fuego is more stream sounds. There's one from Indonesia, which is rain and frogs. We have cat purring. We have the interior of a commercial airliner minus the baby crying and turbulence announcements. So we have white noise. We have, did I say a cat purr? We do have that. We have gray noise, which is, white noise is equal power at all frequencies. Gray noise is equal loudness. And that has to do with how our ears are, because our acuity is different at different frequencies. So that's actually a really nice one. Gray noise is quite nice. We didn't have pink and brown noise. Some of these emphasize the lower frequencies, and people find those a little bit nicer than the white noise with high frequencies. We have one that's crickets and those sort of insects at night. And we have one that is actually two pianos playing improvisationally, but they've manipulated the sound so you almost have a reverse envelope for some of this. It's really nice. Anyway, but that was the only one that was probably close to music. The rest were these sorts of sounds, so that's what they were. Okay, so once you have this thing implemented, and I'd like to give a big shout out to Yuri Guo, who was the first software engineer who worked on this. It's kind of a simple thing. She ended up, I always, if somebody's going to program something and it's not me, I use Lisp, and that's what I use. And most people laugh, but it's really great prototype language. But maybe for this, people should use what they're most comfortable with. It ended up being JavaScript, but that caused, I would say, a lot of issues in the software because of that. There are a lot of things to integrate. You have to integrate these devices, this stuff. It was not an easy thing. So Yuri Guo and then Mark Haley came on later on, and he did a lot of instrumentation of the software for the experiments.
Can I ask more specific?
You may ask whatever you want to ask.
Was it reinforced JS or the here? Like what library?
JavaScript, but I don't know what version of it.
I just ordered they make their own code. There is a nice library, but it's Android Car Copies library. So
This is, I mean, a lot of the stuff, the reinforcement learning aspect was a small aspect of the software. Let's just put it that way. Tiny, okay?
I think it's the most important.
Well, you may well say, and I may agree with you,
Okay.
but we had to have Chrome driver integrated here. We had all of this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, there was all of this other stuff on top was the big deal of the software. It was not the learning. It would be 5 seconds to write the algorithm, right? It's not a big deal. So, yeah, always, yeah.
Do you mind explaining a little bit more about how you got the data from it?
How we got the data from what?
From HealthGauge, the app?
Ah, well, you know, I sort of wish I knew the details about that. We were exposed none of that software, which caused us a little bit of an issue. So this comes over Wi-Fi, basically how I think they did it, and how I recommended that they did it, but who knows whether that's how they did it. So you have this data. They were able to grab us this stuff somehow, but they didn't let us know. And then to send it here, we basically had to have it, you know, 2 devices on a Wi-Fi network communicating, and it had to look for, because we had multiple guys, when we were running experiments in last setting, we had multiple guys with phones and laptops over the same Wi-Fi network. So they had to find each other, and they used a port number in order to do that. But getting the raw data here, I don't know exactly how they did it. I mean, it's not released to most guys to do it, because most of the time it goes to an app here, and you can look at it yourself and do all the things you want, but as far as pushing data out like that, that was a special for us, and it was really nice that they did that. It's really nice. Okay, where am I? Oh, God, you know, I might actually be on time. Okay, so the questions, things that I wanted to ask, you know, are these heart rate measurements accurate, right? How much variation, we talked about that one. Is the reward signal appropriate? We sort of talked about that one. And I'll sort of answer these, sort of answered them already, but from the experiments, I'll show you what happened with that. What are the subject's response to sounds? There's sort of the response in the physiological ones, but then there's also, when the way we instrumented the software is the guys at the beginning would say a little bit about maybe what they'd done prior to when they had to sit around and listen to these things. And they're all healthy volunteers. There's no ICU patients involved in this at all. So they would say, oh, yeah, I just, you know, I had a fight with my sister, or I, you know, ate lunch, or whatever happened. You would put that in there. And then at the end, they would say whatever, like, oh, this user interface is terrible, or, you know, I like this sound, or I fell asleep, or whatever. So we got those verbal sort of responses. Is there habituation to these things? Are there preferences from the sound library that I did have? What are those things? Yes?
Could you tell us something what these experiments are?
I will, in just a moment, but I want to tell you the questions I wanted to answer before I tell you about the experiments. Is that all right? Okay. Is there a benefit of learning sounds? You know, does that really give you anything? It's nice to do learning. We all like to do learning, right? But is that the thing? Was this mock ICU environment sufficient as a stressor so I could detect things in there, right? I had a particular environment. I'll talk to you about that in a minute. Is the system easy to use? Were the subjects compliant, right? What is that? So what sort of experiments did we do? We had 2 pieces of the experiment. One is guys listen at home, and they listen for 3 hours, not all at once, but they listen at home in a quiet environment. You don't have to be lying down or anything. Again, no, none of this because of the sensor, but yeah, and as long as you don't drink a lot of caffeine or alcohol, or you go for a run right beforehand, anything that would push your heart rate up, that's good. You could have an argument beforehand, and we'd like to see how this worked for it, but the rest of it, no. So there was 3 hours at home, and all of that was done with Epsilon greeting. So you search the space there while you're, then you go to this amazing place. I see Ephraim in the back here. NATE has something called the Center for Advanced Medical Simulation, and it is unbelievable, okay? It's unreal what they have in there. So we had set up, there are many things, and I'm not going to talk about them all now, but Ephraim is here, and if he could stay and people want to talk to him about it would be great. We had a sort of a mock ICU set up, because what I wanted to see is how does this, it's fine if guys are relaxed and listening to this, fine, but what happens if they're stressed? Now, stressing guys can be an ethical situation. You have to sign all this ethics paperwork here at the university whenever you do things. I mean, I understand that, but at the same time, okay. So you want to stress them, but it shouldn't be something that, it shouldn't be something that's dangerous to them, but it also should be something that can pass ethics testing. So I thought, well, a lot of people have a little bit of white coat, you know, stress that happens, and maybe putting them in a mock environment where it's like an ICU, but not exactly. So they're still feeling healthy, but some of the things are the same. You have all this tethering and feeling like you don't have control over yourself. Maybe that's going to cause some stress in these guys. So what did we do to these poor guys, these volunteers? We put a blood pressure cuff on them. They all had a pulse oximeter. They had, in addition to this thing, of course, which is our monitor, And they had a nasal cannula, wasn't dispensing anything, but yet it was there. In fact, one participant was most nervous about the nasal cannula over anything else. They had an IV thing taped to their arm, but not obviously inserted. But still, while the machine beep, 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 beep the whole time, right? I don't know if you've been in hospital setting, but that goes on, right? So there's that sort of a thing. And then we had a bunch of different calls set up, like, okay, you know, I need a crash cart in this room, or visiting hours are over. So those sort of things came over a PA. There was the smell of disinfectant in the room. This is an amazing facility, I'm sorry, but, and then we had two critical care nurses who work with Elizabeth, who was one of the two PIs on the, two medical PIs on the project, and they acted in their role as nurses in there. So they would come in and check on the patients. They also had a little scenario where they were like, they would come in and go, oh my God, this isn't set up right. Is this set up not right for each patient? So, you know, there were things that would cause maybe stress to the guys, okay? So that was the setup, and I thought, well, is this gonna be enough? And I was kind of hoping it was. I kind of think it wasn't, what I found out from this, but here we go. So I set up 4 different arms of this study. 2 of them had learning in them, and 2 of them didn't. So some people were satisfied, some people won't. The first one, you've already done all your at-home listening. So you come in there and you're gonna be going, it's not broken, don't fix. You start with the values for your sounds, whatever you've learned during your epsilon greeting phase. And again, these updates are done, we haven't changed this interval or anything like that, but the learning happens in both cases. The only thing is different is this arm forgets what it's learned before, and it starts with all the values equal, okay? So that means that, you know, if there were particular things that you didn't like here or something, that would not be known there. This arm, the third arm, no learning, you hear gray noise throughout the whole thing. And that's the one that has the equal loudness, but not equal power there. So it's most like, I would say, the inside of the aircraft cabin if you listen to these noises. And these poor guys had to hear beep, 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 and oh my God, you know, and visiting hours, blah, blah, blah. They had all of that there, right? So they didn't wearing anything to block these things out. So those are the 4 things. So we had them in there for, I guess, half an hour at a time running this thing. And the scenario just lasted for that long.
And what were they told was the purpose of them being there?
Of them being there, they were told about what this project was about. Yeah. I mean, they didn't know, you know, about reinforcement learning. Some of them did. There's some participants in this room, I have to say. But yeah. Okay. So this device that HealthGauge provided to us seems to be pretty accurate. I mean, it gave, look, comparing it to the, I'd done this previously with other devices I had, but I don't know they're medical grade. It looked like it was giving the same sorts of answers and looking at what the values came out of this, the wrist device versus the other PPG device. It was a fingertip pulse oximeter, as well as the blood pressure thing. Heart rate was virtually the same on all of these. So yeah, that's pretty good. There is a lot of difference in the subject heart rate samples, and this happened in the at-home. I'm not even talking about it. In fact, I would say there was less variation in the ICU than there was at home. So these can be quite big, and I kind of screwed up with my delta here. Is the reward signal appropriate? I think the 15 seconds is too short of a time for that, just because of the variation, and again, this thing is too small. So that's, you know, to be determined. Okay, what else? Well, good thing was really heart rate didn't increase for anybody on the sounds, even the guys who pressed a button. There were a few surfers on there, ping, 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 I want to hear something else, right? You know, no, and we had, our system was set up where you couldn't do that infinitely, you could just do a little bit. It usually decreased, but the thing is I can't prove cause and effect. So particularly when someone is sitting quietly, is the reduction in heart rate that I see over time just because they might have been walking around and they were sitting down, or is it caused by this sound? I mean, the plus is that first thing didn't happen, right? It wasn't like they plugged this in and, oh my God, you know, but at the same time, is it cause and effect? That I can't prove. I do know. What?
Was the decrease larger in the
Silent.
than in the silent condition or in the ICU?
Not so much, which was interesting. They're more normal. At the ICU, most of the guys started with a higher heart rate. than they did at home. So I think they were a little bit wound up. But again, they were also lying in the bed there. So did that lying in the bed bring it down more? They did, but not, it wasn't interrogation lighting, there was bright lighting, right? So it was hard to say. I do know that especially for the at-home listening, most guys said that either they felt relaxed, but more of them said, I feel really sleepy. And in fact, you could tell some of them fell asleep. Their heart rate would drop below 50, and you knew they were out because they had a 3-hour listening session in one go, right? So they had gone, right? So in some sense, that's a good thing, but it doesn't really tell me anything about, the real ICU situation. So I was surprised in the ICU that people were their heart rate was as low, even though it started high. And as I say, I don't know whether to attribute that to lying down the sound or both. Habituation, certainly not observed in the heart rate. Like people's heart rate didn't go up, but there was one particular user, as I say, participant that said, enough of this sound, I'm getting off of it. So I think, boredom can come in, but that was actually the exceptional case. Preferences, it was funny because the sounds that people, if they were going to hop off, most people didn't hop off the sounds because they don't think they bothered them. The ones that did, white noise, the insects, which also have very high frequency components, the night insects, and the cat purr. So either you love cats or you hate them. I had another subject who kept searching for the cat purr sound. Where is it? Where is it? Okay, so people are different, right? This is one thing you found. There was no one size. Yet people are not the same. That's one reason why I don't have any statistical stuff up here, because it was so much different between each participant on many things. What?
How many participants?
We started with about 30. About 5 ended up dumping really early, almost before they started because of worrying about time commitments. One guy got worried because Google, just like Microsoft, is really paranoid about what their users might do. So when the Health Gauge app comes up, if you're on an Android, it goes, oh my God, this is not secure, you better watch out. And I think that was repeated enough for this participant. They thought, maybe it's true. So we had one dropout, and then we ended up with 24 of those. 23 were compliant. One of those was not. So yeah, it was unfortunately a small set. Okay, so what else do we have?
And each one does, you said 3 hours of training?
At home, they listen for 3 hours. It's not consecutive. What we try to do is have guys do 15 to 20 minutes a piece, so you have at least a couple of few learning intervals going on there. We didn't. If it's less than 5 minutes, it's useless because it's not happening.
If I'm not mistaken, they each have their own agent that they're training in those sessions.
Yeah, it's not training. I like to feel that the agent is learning.
Agents learning during the sessions. Then, so they only have like 60 learning moments, those agents, like the 20, 20, and 20 for each hour, like those 5-minute windows to learn.
What do we have? Do we have 12 of those in an hour, right? So whatever that is. Yeah, it's not a lot of time. It's not a lot of time.
Can you look at their air? Do they seem to pick anything over time?
We did. Did we just?
Yeah, you mentioned it.
Yeah. So the things.
No, the people pick, but just the agents.
Oh yeah, well sure. I mean, it takes the value of the sound based on the heart rate, and it picks.
And does that become more likely towards one sound for each person over their learning?
No, the ones that wasn't so much. There were some of those that were that case, and particularly once you're in this sort of secondary, not broken, don't fix it, if the sound is working for you, you're gonna tend to be there, so you're gonna be updating on that, and if it's always good for you, that will give you a good thing. But it seemed like there wasn't a particular one. The things that were biased away from, if somebody had clicked out, those were way off. But the other ones, this is what I'm saying, when I mentioned before, that I think I picked the sounds too well. I think a lot of them were really good, so they worked for a lot of people. It wasn't like, oh God, that's terrible. For different guys, very few. There were those exceptional 3 sounds that caused problems, but the rest of them were more or less the same. And in fact, I know that when guys came into the ICU, I think there was only one case of the not broken, don't fix it that actually engaged that something was broken. Everybody else sat there, and whatever sound was played for them first, it stuck through. Okay, so that, yes, Yes.
There was not enough variability.
They did not get all excited by things that happened there. So once through there, it worked well for them. Yeah. Whoops, did I just, oh, shoot. All right, there we go. Well, let me just do it in this way, then you can see all the crap on the screen. So it's a benefit to learning, I think. Yes, in the case of these sounds that make you uncomfortable, yes, there's a benefit. As far as the things of what works well for you, that, again, sort of to your question, there were particular ones, for different people, yeah, there's some variation in what those values were, but it wasn't enough to say, oh, yes, these sounds. So I think the sound set is good. Was this place a significant stressor? I think not. I think even though, guy said, oh my God, I am worried about medical stuff, or I heard those nurses talking, and even though I know it's not real, it's like a thing that's making me a little bit nervous. There is that, but it wasn't reflected in the heart rate, except at the beginning. It was high, and it came down, okay? Ease of use, provided you don't fondle your phone all the time, pretty easy. Setting it up, a pain here, right? It is awful. It's really awful. Some guys, for example, Curran here, took him about 5 minutes to set it up. Some guys, hours, okay? And so that's the state of software now. That's a problem. So like a real system, you wouldn't have to deal with that, but these poor guys endured it, and I really thank them for doing so. The participants were wonderful. Subject compliance, really high. As I say, only one person disregarded just about everything we said that they should follow while they're doing their listening sessions, but the rest was really good. So again, in addition, I mentioned Ephraim and the NATE Center for Advanced Medical Simulation, and also Yuri and Mark, who were the software guys here. I'd like to thank HealthGauge, Randy Gay, for doing a lot of sort of off-label work on their devices for us so that we could get the heart rate information out of them. Elizabeth is sort of bouncing off ideas about, when I was figuring out how I would do the experiments, or looking even at this, what sort of anxiety signals does she think were most fruitful, those sorts of things. I'd like to thank Usha Pant and Yasemin Barguzan for performing their roles very well as critical care nurses that they are at the NATE Center for Advanced Medical Simulation. And I'm probably going to leave some guys out here. Oh, Maria, she helped me with setting up some of the participants with their software, which was a grueling adventure in some cases. I'd like to thank Michael for putting in the money into this project, for the implementation and for the devices and for the work at NATECAMS. And I hope I'm not missing anybody. No, no, I do not. I love Amy. I love Amy, but Amy did not fund this. Amy funded something else, but they did not fund this. Yeah. Amy's great, though. I love Amy. I love Amy. So are there any questions?
And they all just listen to classical music or rock music or new wave, and you know what the gorillas wanted? Silence. So, did anyone want silence in this?
No one asked for that. Whether they did, I don't know. But we did not do that. The problem is these guys are anxious, and maybe just silent. Gray noise is close to that because of what it does. It's almost like noise canceling headphones when you do that. Again, reducing anxiety. There are two things that can go on. There's the distraction effect, which, like they often do for kids when they go to the doctor, they do something that distracts them. But there's the other effect is the how does this affect your parasympathetic nervous system? The one that's the antagonist to the sympathetic nervous system. It gets you in fight or flight. It's the rest and digest or feed and breed. And that thing will, well, it is, I'm sorry, but they have these little things to help you remember them by. So that will help to dilate your blood vessels and slow your heart rate and all of those things. So my question actually, and I tried to find this in papers, but I was not really successful about this. Actually, in the case where you're not looking at the distraction factor, but you're looking to see about how you can reduce anxiety, is the primary thing that you are reducing the activity of the sympathetic nervous system that's doing the fight or flight, or is it that you are trying to increase the activity of the parasympathetic nervous system? And it may be both going on at the same time. I don't know, but I've seen some papers that say it's only reducing sympathetic activity, and other guys say the other. So actually the biological mechanisms are going on. I don't know for sure. And that's an interesting thing to pursue, but I don't know what the answer is. Maybe nobody really knows those answers. Yeah.
What would you do differently now that you've gone through this, or what is the plans for the next step of that?
Okay.
What you're gonna go
Well, let me
after.
tell you what I would do differently. I would get a project coordinator for a project like this who has a respect and the power to make things happen. When you have something with multiple vendors like this and multiple pieces of equipment, you can be me and not have those things. Or you can have a project that I could have really used on this project. That was a big mistake. These are going to be sort of different sorts of mistakes than you might suspect. I would get somebody to be the subject wrangler as a full-time job, because it is one. That means scheduling people in where they have to be when, making sure, enlisting the participants to begin with, making sure they have what they need, blah, 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 full-time. It's not something you should take. I can speak from personal experience. It's really fun. I enjoyed meeting. There are new guys and everything else. They have all different experiences, come from all different places in the world, all different walks of life. So that was great, but you need somebody to do that. You need sort of a tech support guy who can help. I know. Can I keep going though?
I'm enjoying it so much. Unfortunately, I think someone else is coming in after.
Oh, shit. Okay, let me just finish this. Tell them to just wait for a second. So there's that aspect, because I know I did house calls for participants, and a lot of it was like, oh, I touched my phone. Okay, it's not all that, but there were things like, right? Okay, so there are those issues. And the last one is making sure you have somebody who makes detailed test plans so that you can see that the software does what you have asked people to make it do, okay? Putting out requirements, that's great. Do you pay attention to the requirements? Not so much. If you give them a test, put it out there and find out how, and that's a big deal too. So I screwed up big time on that, I have to say, I did. So those are things that I would do differently. I would love to see this experimented on with real guys. But again, some of these cause and effect things, I don't know, and I don't even know how to know that, right? So anyway, that's my experience. I don't know where it's going to go. There's no more money on this project. If somebody wants to pursue it in the future, they may. It's probably not me, but yeah, there it is. Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot.